So they live
150年。
it's pretty old. It's getting pretty old for sure.
对树来讲，树龄还
Nice
很高
place.
了。这
Nice place.
很美的地方
I，like it.
我很喜
I
欢，
like it.
我喜欢这地
I
儿。
could get used to this.
我这地儿能待得惯，我可能不想走。
Before a single American set foot back on Air Force One after Trump's two-day summit in Beijing, every single item handed to the U.S. delegation by Chinese officials, credentials, badges, pins, commemorative gifts, was collected and thrown into a trash bin at the bottom of the stairs on the tarmac. Nothing of Chinese origin boarded that plane, and the personal phones. The entire delegation had left them at home. Every American used burner phones throughout the trip, then destroyed and abandoned them in China before departure because they knew in Beijing everything is a potential listening device. So let me ask you this. If the trip went so well, why did America's top officials treat every souvenir like a potential spy? Weapons stay right here because what really happened in those 2 days in Beijing tells a story very different from the one Donald Trump is selling. Welcome to Global Sketch. If you're new here, hit subscribe and let's get into it. Let's set the scene. Trump arrived in Beijing on May 13, 2026. His first visit to China since 2017, and he did not arrive from a position of strength. In April 2025, Trump escalated tariffs on Chinese goods past 145%. China fired back with a 125% counter tariff on American products. Then Beijing played its trump card, and it was not a bluff. China controls roughly 90% of the world's rare earth mineral processing. When Beijing threatened to cut those flows, materials essential for missiles, fighter jets, advanced electronics, and semiconductors, Washington folded twice. April 2025, October 2025. Both times Trump backed down rather than escalate. So when Trump landed in Beijing, Xi Jinping had already won the economic standoff. The Council on Foreign Relations noted before the summit that Xi had long believed and told his own cadres that the East is rising and the West is declining, and that time and momentum are on China's side. The U.S. was also arriving with the Iran war unresolved and the Strait of Hormuz effectively closed, the choke point through which roughly 20% of the world's oil normally travels. America came to the table needing something from China. China did not arrive needing much from America. The summit itself was an extraordinary spectacle. Trump was greeted with goose-stepping soldiers, a military band, flag-waving children, and a lavish state banquet featuring Beijing roast duck, kung pao chicken, and pan-fried pork buns. Day 2 took Trump and Xi to the Zhongnanai, the centuries-old imperial garden compound where China's top leadership lives and works. It is a deeply rare invitation. Xi himself framed it as reciprocating Trump's hosting him at Mar-a-Lago in 2017. The two leaders strolled the gardens, Trump admiring the roses, calling them the most beautiful roses anyone's ever seen. She responded graciously. He would send Trump some Chinese rose seeds as a departing gift. Seeds, not roses. Seeds for a president who has no rose garden at the White House because it was torn up during the first term. This was the departing gift. Seeds for a garden that no longer exists, and she knew this. He had visited that rose garden himself during his 2015 state visit with President Obama. He was fully aware Trump left Beijing, calling the trip fantastic and claiming fantastic trade deals good for both countries. So let's look at what actually materialized. Headline number: China agreed to purchase 200 Boeing jets. Trump called it a lot of jobs. A lot. Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg was on the tripper. Is the problem before Trump flew to Beijing, markets were pricing in a possible 500 plane deal. The actual number came in at less than half that expectation. Boeing's stock dropped more than 4% on the announcement that else China agreed to buy American soybeans and agricultural products. Trump celebrated this on Fox News as a massive win, but under President Biden, China was purchasing enormous volumes of American soybeans regularly. That purchasing stopped when Trump launched the trade war. China retaliated and buying collapsed. What Trump called a new deal is largely a partial restoration of what existed before the conflict. Ships. Trump told reporters he did not discuss computer chips or tariffs with Xi at all during the summit. Chinese stocks slid on Friday as investors processed the thin substance behind the pageantry in Iran. Trump claimed both sides agree Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon and that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open for global shipping. That sounds significant, so let's look at what China actually committed to in 2025 and the first quarter of 2026. China was purchasing approximately 1 4 million barrels of Iranian oil every single day that represented between 12 and 15% of China's total crude imports, but it accounted for more than 90% of Iran's entire oil export revenue. China is Iran's economic lifeline. Xi told Trump he would not send military equipment to Iran. Secretary of State Marco Rubio clarified to NBC News that Trump did not ask Xi to pressure Iran or help end the war when asked directly whether China could influence Iran on the Strait of Hormuz. Trump replied, "Probably, but I'm not really sure." That was the answer after 2 days of bilateral talks with the world's largest bureau of Iranian oil analysts noted that Beijing's statements on Hormuz and nuclear weapons cost China virtually nothing. The harder test, whether China will actually pressure Tehran or cut Iranian oil purchases, produced zero observable commitments. Davin is perhaps the most consequential issue in the entire U.S.-China relationship, and here is a detail that should not be overlooked. Chinese official readout at the summit stated that she warned Trump directly, if the Taiwan issue is not handled properly, the two countries will have clashes and even conflicts, putting the entire relationship in great jeopardy. U.S. readout of that same meeting did not mention Taiwan at all. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said U.S. policy on Taiwan remains unchanged, but Trump, when asked by reporters whether the U.S. would defend Taiwan, said, "I don't talk about that." And on a pending $14 billion arms sale to Taiwan, Trump said he had made no commitment either way. So the world's most important bilateral relationship concluded 2 days of talks with China issuing a stark warning about Taiwan, and Washington's official account left it out entirely. Context matters enormously in diplomacy. In September 2015, Xi Jinping made a formal state visit to Washington. He went to the White House to meet President Obama. In November 2023, she came to San Francisco for APEC and met President Biden there. The last time she was in Washington was a decade ago. For this summit, Trump traveled to Beijing. He went to Xi. That is not just a travel arrangement. In the language of diplomacy and symbolic power, it tells a story about leverage and who is seeking what from whom. So after all the pageantry, the banquets, the garden walks, and the rose seats, what did each side actually take home? Xi Jinping walked away with a U.S. president who publicly praised him as one of the world's great leaders and posted his photo on Truth Social with that caption. He walked away with an American president who expressed no clear commitment to defending Taiwan, no chip export restrictions reimposed, no demand that China cut Iranian oil purchases, no structural change to China's economic model. Xi got a partial Boeing order, less than half market expectation. He got Trump to endorse on Fox News while sitting in Beijing that Chinese nationals
Say about him that if you went to Hollywood and you looked for a leader of China to play a role in a movie,
Central casting.
he's central casting. You couldn't find a guy like him. Even his physical features, he's tall, very tall, and especially for this country, because they tend to be a little bit shorter. You look at the military, the military today was incredible. That military marching was incredible. But no, if you went to Hollywood, you're not going to find a guy to play the role who's good. And he's I'll get criticized. They always criticize me when I say good things about certain leaders, and this one. But he's a leader for China. He's led almost 1.5 billion people for a long time, and he's respected. It's sort of interesting when the fake news said, he said, they'll say, President Trump said that President Xi was a brilliant leader. That's a terrible thing. What am I going to do? But it's...
Buying American farmland and Chinese students attending American universities are both fine, directly contradicting what Trump and his allies argued on the 2024 campaign trail. Xi received something arguably more valuable than any single deal: the optics of America's president traveling to Beijing, admiring his compound, calling him warm, and leaving with rose seats for a leader who has told his cadres for years that China is on the rise and the West is declining. Having the American president tour your garden and say, "I could get used to this," is not a small thing, which brings us back to that trash bin on the tarmac. White House correspondent Emily Gooden reported that American staff collected everything Chinese officials had given to the delegation: credentials, pins, burner phones.
We settle, and the relationship is a very strong one. We've really done some wonderful things, I believe. We did discuss Iran. We feel very similar to Iran. We want that to end. We don't want them to have a nuclear weapon. We want the straits open. We're closing it now. They closed it, and we closed it on top of it. But we want the straits open, and we want them to get it ended, because it's a crazy thing. They're really crazy, and it's no good. Can't have it. They cannot have a nuclear weapon.
And threw them all in a bin at the bottom of the Air Force One stairs before boarding. Nothing from China was allowed on the plane. The entire delegation left their personal American devices at home, used clean burner phones throughout Beijing, then destroyed and abandoned those phones in China. Hotel rooms were swept by security teams before any American official entered. This is what operating in Beijing actually looks like. Underneath the smiles and the handshakes to leaders exchanging warm words in a beautiful garden, while America's own intelligence protocols treated every Chinese origin object as a potential surveillance device. That is the real picture of this relationship. Not enemies, not friends, rivals, running competing intelligence operations, managing an extraordinarily high-stakes competition while making just enough deals to keep the global economy from fracturing. US-China relationship is the most consequential geopolitical relationship of the 21st century. Over $650 billion in annual bilateral trade to nuclear powers, competing visions for global order, the Taiwan question unresolved, a rare earth supply chain that gives Beijing structural leverage over American military capability. Against that backdrop, 2 days of state dinners and garden walks produced 200 Boeing jets at less than half market expectation, some soybeans, vague agreements on Iran's nuclear program, with no enforcement mechanism, and a promise that she might visit Washington in September. Trump called it incredible. She called it historic. Markets called it underwhelming. Rose seeds. Everybody rose seeds. If you found this breakdown useful, subscribe to Global Sketch. We do this kind of data-driven sourced analysis every week. Hit the like button, share this with someone who needs the full picture, and we will see you in the next one.